So we are in this series going through the book of Genesis, and we are nearing the end. We got about 2 more weeks left, and then we're going to put the series on pause, and we're going to pick it up in January of 2026. And then we'll wrap it up, part 3, in January of 2027. Today, we get to see also sort of the conclusion of one of the main characters in this part of the story of Noah, the character of Noah. Now, this is kind of this particular passage we'll look at is kind of, it's a little weird, I guess. It's one way I guess I would use to describe it, because you have this story of Noah in an encounter he has with one of his sons, and then you have Noah sort of cursing his grandchild, and then there's this long genealogy. And it's weird because it kind of feels like 2 different stories kind of colliding, but actually what they do is they sort of the one sets up the other story. At the same time, this story would be one that would have been either told verbally or read to Israel when they were in exile, so when they were not in their homeland, when they were in Egyptian slavery. And so this story would kind of serve as a way to remind them of how they got to where they were. So that's just a little bit of a background there. Our text is going to be up on the screen here. Sometimes we have a reader, and sometimes I read. Today, out of my grace and mercy that I'm pouring out to you, I decided to read because I did not want you to have to fumble through some of these names, because, I am not perfect, so just be prepared. Okay, so Genesis chapter 9, starting at verse 18, we're going to go all the way through chapter 10. So the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the 3 sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned in the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." And he also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years, and then he died. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. So the sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togaram. The sons of Javan: Elinash, Tarshish, the Kittites, and the Rodanites. From these, the maritime peoples spread out into their territories by their clans within their nations, each with its own language. The sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush: Seba, Havilah, Sabat, Ramah, and Sebteca. The sons of Ramah: Sheba, and Dedan. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Kelna in Shinar. That land, he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. Egypt was the father of the Luddites, Anamites, Lehabites, Nephatuhites, Pathrusites, Casluhites, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorites. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of the Hittites. Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Architites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Later, the Canaanite clan scattered, and the borders of Canaan reached from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages and their territories and nations. Sons were also born to Shem, whose older brother was Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the sons of Eber. The sons of Shem: Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram: Uz, Hul, Gether, and Meshech. Arphaxad was the father of Selah, and Selah the father of Eber. 2 sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg, not Pegleg, because in his time the earth was divided. His brother was named Joktan. Joktan was the father of Almudad, Shelapha, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Opal, Obameel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Sephar to the eastern hill country. These are the sons of Shem by their clans and languages in their territories and nations. These are the clans of Noah's sons, according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. I feel like I can just give the benediction at this point. We did it, guys. We did it. All right. Thank you for bearing with me there. So, our journey through Genesis continues, and we have this really, again, unique, kind of odd story. And I was trying to think, what's the big picture? What's the big idea for this story? And this old rhyme came, oh man, this is going to rhyme. This old rhyme came to mind to me as I was doing some reading and studying this week. Help me along if you know this. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. It's an old phrase that gets used often during a wedding ceremony or a marriage. And it represents something that is being passed on, typically to the bride and groom, from something new, something borrowed, something blue. It's this idea of what you're inheriting or incorporating into your, not only just your wedding ceremony, but your marriage. And so that phrase kept jumping out to me, and I don't know why. And then I thought of it, well, I'm going to change it up a little bit to help us maybe understand what God is trying to tell us this morning. So this story has something old, something new, something shared, and something through. Now, for you bookworms in here, and dictionary people, I know that's not how you spell through, but bear with me here. What do I mean by these things? Something old is a continuation from the past, all right? Something new is something that you're looking forward to, a hope for the future. Something shared is a common experience that everyone sort of has. And then something through is this more an idea of moving towards completion. And I believe that this particular story that we're looking at has these 4 areas in them, or these 4 points in them. And that's how we'll kind of go through our story today. So something old, something from the past. How do we get here? Let's a quick recap from creation. So we have creation, Genesis 1 and 2, including the creation of Adam and Eve, these 2 people who God creates in his image and in his likeness. They have they're perfect. At least as we understand, they have a perfect, harmonious relationship with each other and with God. And then suddenly, sin enters the picture. Knowledge of good and evil enters the picture. And from that point on, you have this slow decline of the perfect world falling more and more into a sin, sort of broken relationship with God and with each other. You have, obviously, Adam and Eve have their disconnected relationship and are kicked out of the garden. Cain and Abel, their two sons, have a pretty unsettling interaction where Cain kills Abel, and then it just continues on and on for the rest of creation. This slow decline, this spiraling downward. What we see, so something old that is from the past also then, is the condition of the human heart. That we still see that we are not perfect, even after the flood. So the idea of the flood was to wipe out everything on creation, to start fresh, to start new. That was God's intent with the flood. And what happens is in this story, the flood is over. Noah and his family and his sons get off the ark onto this new, fresh earth, but their heart hasn't changed. And we see that in what happens with Noah and Ham and apparently a bottle of wine. That Noah begins to work the soil. He plants a vineyard similar to Adam. And in his planting and growing and harvesting, becomes drunk and passes out in his tent, and he passes out naked. Now we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but in that moment, his son Ham, the youngest of the three brothers, walks in and sees his naked father and does something that he shouldn't do. He turns around and he tells his other two brothers. He kind of gossips. He doesn't look at his father with care and compassion. He looks at it sort of with a disdain. Like, oh, come on, Dad, really? The human heart, the condition of the human heart has not been cleaned up. We are still acting in selfish ways. And it's evident here in this interaction with Noah and Ham. So something new, though. Well, there's something new, though, in the midst of all this, right? There's a future, there's a hope for something, and that's actually the promise that God made to Noah and his family. God told Noah and his family earlier in chapter 9 that, one, he told them after the flood that to be fruitful and multiply and populate the earth, to grow, to restart civilization, to restart humanity. And so that promise that God made, that command he gave, extends to Noah and Ham, to Japheth, to Shem, and to their family, despite their old ways, despite the condition of their heart. And then God kind of adds on to this promise that he will no longer destroy the earth with a flood. And that promise is represented by a rainbow, this visual representation. And so God gives them this chance to start over. So again, Noah works the soil. He works the ground. He does actually what Adam, his forefather, his great-great-great-grandfather did. He works the soil. He works the ground. And the family begins to expand, and civilization gets this sort of redo. And again, this is happening all in light of a broken and a fallen world. We're still living in that. That's kind of the shared experience, I would say. The something shared that happens is that despite the changes, despite the hope and the optimism and the potential for something to improve, we still see shame and embarrassment as part of the human condition. Noah gets drunk and he passes out naked. And in that state he's in of vulnerability, of being vulnerable and exposed, Ham, his youngest son, does the opposite of what he was supposed to do. See, in Hebrew culture, getting drunk was like a misconduct in Hebrew culture. It was kind of frowned upon, but there wasn't really much of a punishment or discipline for it. It was just something that you probably shouldn't do. However, being naked in Hebrew culture, that was a serious offense. Because within our nakedness, we see shame. We're vulnerable. We're exposed. And so Ham most likely knows this because he has grown up in a Hebrew family. He has probably heard stories and what it means to look after one another. And so when he walks into this tent and he sees his naked father, instead of covering him Instead of looking after him with care and compassion, he turns in disgust and he goes and tells his brothers. Guys, come on. Look at Dad. Go check out Dad in the tent. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being in that moment? And the other two brothers, Shem and Japheth, are like, no, what are you doing? This is embarrassing. This is a poor reflection on us. We got to do something about this. And so they cover their father up. They respond the way that you should, a level of respect and care for their parents, unlike Ham. We don't quite understand how. We know that Noah wakes up and he somehow hears about what has happened between him and Ham and then his other two brothers, his other two sons, and he does something which, I don't know, if you, as I'm reading this for the first time, I'm like, this seems awfully extreme. He wakes up and here's what Ham does, and he says, cursed be to Canaan. Canaan is Ham's son. So he says, cursed Canaan. Canaan, may you essentially be a slave to your other two brothers, And to Shem and Japheth, the other two brothers, may it be a blessing. May their line increase. May God show favor upon them. This is where we get what's known as the Table of Nations in chapter 10. What we're seeing here is we're actually seeing a fast forwarding. We're getting a chance to peer into the future of Israel about why did they have this sort of relationship. Because what happens here is Shem and Japheth, they are blessed. And between the two of them, they bring about 40 different nations. And these 40 different nations have their own cultures, have their own language, have their own practices. They are uniquely themselves, and they begin to spread out across the known world as far up as Turkey and Greece. And actually, out of Shem's line, out of the line that has been blessed, comes Abraham, which we'll hear about later in Genesis. But however, Ham's line is cursed. Ham's line produces Canaan, produces Egypt, produces the Assyrians, produces the Babylonians, produces Nimrod. These nations, these people are just as unique. He actually, Ham produces, I think it's somewhere around 30, if I remember, different nations and groups, all with their own language, own practices, except these tend to give Israel, the line of Shem, a pretty hard time in the future. Especially the Canaanites and the Egyptians, the Babylonians and the Assyrians. So again, imagine ourselves being Israel in exile, and we're hearing this story after the fact, and we're like, oh, now I remember why I'm here. It's those dang Canaanites. It's those Egyptians. It's those Babylonians, it's those Assyrians, it's the ones that our great-great-great-grandparents, our great-great-grandfather cursed. That's why we are in the position we're in. It's a foretelling, it's a prophetic word actually in many ways. I want to pause here because often the temptation is when we come up to a genealogy like this, is to skip over it. One, because it's hard for us to make certain connections to it because it's not written really to us. It's written to the original audience, Israel in exile. We're kind of getting to peer into it. So to us, it doesn't quite make sense. But then what we do realize is actually it is for us. It's telling us a story. And the Bible so this is a picture first of all what does this look like for the Table of Nations as they get spread out? So the green there kind of spread out through the north, that is Japheth's family. That's where his line goes. So you see all the different, how it gets spread out there. The orange is Ham, so mostly through the Mediterranean Sea area. And then that purple is the descendants of Shem. So these are kind of what we know as where they get spread out throughout the known world as they best understand it. Now, why is this important? Well, again, for Israel, this comes from that commentary I've mentioned before, Genesis for Normal People. Genealogies, family trees, and lines were a reminder to Israel that they are still connected to the people of God from way back. This was this anchor. These genealogies, these lists were this anchor that was supposed to keep them settled and staying in one spot. Even when it felt they had drifted and moved away from God, it was this thing to draw them back to say, you know what? We are still God's people. We are still loved by a God who blessed us, even when it's hard to see the blessing. Even when it's hard to see God in this, He He called us. He blessed us. We are part of this family tree. And really the same goes for us, friends. Our story, right, is a connection. Our family line, our spiritual DNA, the reason you're here today is actually a point to say that God cares about you, that he wants you to somehow be reminded of who you are, that you are loved by him. That's what I would argue is the something through, something moving forward. What we see in this story is God's determination and his grace. His determination comes in the fact that after Adam and Eve fall into temptation and the perfect, harmonious relationship of creation is fractured and broken, God is still determined to rescue his people. But he can't do it with perfect people. So he has to use imperfect people to do it. He is determined to show that he is a God of love and grace and mercy, and he's going to do it by picking imperfect people like Noah. Even in the midst of Ham's lack of respect, it's a part of God's working through him that brings about the redemption through Shem and Japheth's line. That God uses imperfect people and unqualified people actually to get this rescue mission that he's on accomplished. Because that's ultimately what God is up to. Because in Genesis 3, which is what we often refer to as the fall, God has to fully sort of accept that, all right, well, this is not the way I had intended things to be, but I love what I have created enough, including humanity, that I'm willing to restore it and fix it. But I've got to use what is given to me. That's the through line. That's the thing that actually can be followed all the way from Genesis 1 all the way through the end of Revelation. The Bible, kind of in a nutshell, one nutshell, is that God is out to redeem and rescue his people that he deeply loves, people like me and you. That's where I believe the connection through this story, or the connection of this story draws us in, is that everyone in this room has a version of the old, the new, the shared, and the through. You don't have to answer this, but what's in your past? What are the things in your past that may be similar to Ham's? Things that you probably rather forget. At the same time, what are the things that you're looking forward to? What is this thing that you are optimistic of that is going to happen, that is going to restore and make things a little bit better for you? Question that we can maybe ask ourselves as we think about this is who can relate to my story, or who can I relate to in my story? What's the shared experience? The through is, what's the constant? What is that constant thing in your life? Now, I want to pause here because I want to acknowledge that maybe not everyone here has a relationship with Jesus. And so maybe your constant is something else. Maybe your constant is your faith. Maybe your constant is your relationship with Jesus. It's been your constant for most of your life, but maybe it's not. Maybe your constant is something else. And if so, well, I'd like to offer you a different one. I'd like to invite you into a constant that is continuing to keep its promise, and that's a relationship with Jesus. Jesus shows up in the old, in the new, in the shared, and in the through. He shows up in the old because he was there in the very beginning. Not just the beginning of creation, where it says that the spirits God hovered over the waters. Jesus was there, he was present, but he was also present in your life. He's been a part of your life since the very beginning. Even though you may not know him or recognize him, he was still a part of it. He was in the new. He was in a new way that God communicated to humanity. See, what's unique about our story here in Genesis is God is communicating with his people in a way that they best understand. It's sort of an old school, kind of archaic, kind of brash way, right? Where God is sort of interacting with humanity the way that other gods did at the time, which is through natural ways in which the earth, so a flood or rain or a rainbow or something like that, right? However, as humanity and civilizations began to progress and change, God changes the way that he communicated with them, which is why we have Jesus. Because what God realized is that as more relational humanity became, they needed a God that was also relational. And so he's in the new because he's in a new way to communicate with us. So when we read about Jesus, we're not just reading a story about a guy named Jesus. We're reading about God who became flesh in Jesus. It's the new way God draws us to him. The something shared is Jesus gets it. Jesus was fully human. He was fully God, and we acknowledge that and we recognize that. It's why he was able to do what he did. But he's also fully human, so he gets what it's like. Jesus knows what it's like to feel lonely. Jesus knows what it's like to be hurt. Jesus knows what it's like to feel like an outsider or to be tempted. Jesus knows what it's like to say goodbye to a loved one. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. He wept at the death of his friend Lazarus. Not only that, Jesus knows what it's like to even doubt. Because as he sits in the garden by himself, abandoned by his friends, right before his crucifixion, he says, Father, if this cup can pass, let it be. If there's another way to do this, God, can we please do that? Sometimes I think it's hard for us to understand how Jesus can relate to us because he's not living today. And that's a fair assumption. That's a fair objection. But if we read the Bible as it was intended to be read through the eyes of a human like Jesus, he gets it. Just like you would get it. The through, though, is that it's the consistency of Jesus. That one thing we can, I would argue right now for this particular story, if we want proof that God deeply cares about his creation and deeply cares about you, is that not only did his son die on the cross for our sins, he came back to life. That God cares enough about you that he wants you to experience the fullness of life, eternal life. That death is just momentary, it's temporary, that it's a doorway into eternity. It's a constant that runs through forever and ever and ever. All right, as we close out this time here, a couple closing thoughts. One is, these may seem simple, but if you sit with them, if you really reflect on them, they are heavy in the sense of they're impactful. One is that God knows you. He knows you're old, not age old. He knows your past. He knows you're new. He knows the future. He knows what you're looking forward to. He knows the shared. He knows what you have experienced, and he can sympathize and empathize with you. He knows because he was there for part of it, for all of it. And he's the through. He is what you need. He knows that. That's why you're here today. But not only does God know you, he loves you. And again, this is what I think is so beautiful about God. In my human mind, I can know someone, but that doesn't mean I have to love them. And often my love for someone will change if I truly know them. God operates differently. God knows you and he loves you, and he can't separate those two things. It's the one thing God can't do. That he says, I love you despite your past. Not only does he love you, he delights in you, the Bible tells us. That even in light of our past, he wants to give you hope and a future. And that in those moments when we are wondering and we are questioning and we are even doubting what the future is, he says, no. Let me share with you. Let's do this together. Let's wonder together. Let's question together. Because he loves you. And ultimately what he is saying is, I love you so much, I'm willing to keep my promise to you. That the promise that God made to Noah is the promise that gets extended to us today. That we here today are descendants of a God who keeps his promise. So how might this story be good news to you? How might this story be good news to someone close to you? Who needs to hear the story of God's knowledge and love for them through the old, the new, the shared, and the through? Another question maybe to reflect on this week of what are there parts of your life you wish you could forget or redo? I'll be the first to admit, yes. There are parts of my life that I wish I could forget and redo. It's in those parts of my life that I think I have experienced the fullness of God's grace and mercy. If that's you this morning, then hold on to this last question. How does it feel knowing God will keep his promise to you? And that promise it could be a lot of different things, but I think the greatest promise he makes to you today is that he promises to love you, to never forsake you, to never leave you, to be slow to anger, to be abounding in love, to be patient with you. It's a promise he made to you. It's a promise he's going to keep. Would you please join me in prayer? Our Father in heaven, I thank you that you are a God who knows everything about us. Thank you for being a God of old, a God of new. Thank you for being a God that sees everything because you exist above time and space. And so even today was not a day that you showed up for, but it was somewhere you were already at. And so for each and every person here this morning who needs to be reminded of your power, of your might, of your love, may they feel that now. Father, I especially pray for those here who are seeking that constant in their life that will always be there for them. May your Spirit do its work today. That whatever seeds have been planted by you, may your Spirit water, and may they bear the fruit that allows them to experience you more. Ultimately, Father, I thank you for your Son, Jesus, who is you in the flesh, that has experienced the fullness of life, including death itself, and has experienced the resurrection that we will one day get to experience. And so, Father, with that being our hope for the future, may your Spirit seal us with that. We pray all this now in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and all God's people said, amen. If you are able to, I invite you to stand as we close out our time here in song.